A silent kitchen, a sandwich untouched, yet someone heard it scream. Welcome to Wolfe Mysteries. I'm your host. Say hello in the comments and share where you're listening from. Your messages make every mystery unforgettable. I was halfway. Through a pastrami sandwich, coleslaw on the side, a cold Heineken in hand, when the front bell rang. That might not sound like a crisis, but at Nero Wolfe's brownstone, interrupting lunch is like firing a gun during a seance. I'd made the mistake of eating in the kitchen instead of my room, putting me in the line of fire when Fritz stormed in, wiping his hands on his apron, scowling like someone had trampled his souffle. Archie, please, someone is at the door. Let them in, Fritz, I mumbled through a bite of rye. We're civilized. Fritz sniffed. It is not a delivery man. It is a young woman. She is distressed. That got my attention. A distressed woman crashing Wolfe's lunch hour was only slightly less welcome than a health inspector during his orchid time. I wiped my hands, gave my sandwich a wistful glance, and headed for the door. She stood there, coat open, face flushed, fingers twisting her handbag strap like it was her lifeline. Late 20s, maybe, with the tense grace of someone who'd either pulled off a heist or just realized their one bad check from ruin. You Nero Wolfe? She asked. No, but I borrow his socks. I'm Archie. Vocabulary. What's the story? Her lips parted, like she might start crying or reciting a monologue instead. She gave a tight nod. My name is Leah McKinnon. A need to speak. To Mr. Wolfe, it's about something that happened this morning at Lucci's Deli. I blinked. You came all the way to 35th Street because of a pastrami panic. You're about 10 blocks east of your local precinct. She stepped inside without waiting for an invite. Someone tampered with my sandwich that I'd admit stopped me in my tracks. I've heard a lot of excuses for knocking on the brownstone's door, but sabotage via salami was a new one. Well, I said Merle's very fond of sandwiches, but I can't promise he'll take it personally. I think someone was trying to send a message. She said there was a note inside. The sandwich folded into the lettuce, and with that she opened her bag, reached in, and pulled out a crumpled wax paper-wrapped horror that had once been an Italian sub. She carefully unfolded it to reveal a sliver of paper oil stained, but still legible. I took it, turned it over, and read, "Stop asking questions, or you'll be next." I gave a low whistle. Okay, so it wasn't the mustard that made it spicy. Need help? She said. Real help, not a Copsimeon smart. I'll give the girl this. She had guts showing up here. Wolfe didn't open shop for cranks or drama queens, and the word threat usually made him reach for the sherry and mutter about human idiocy, but this had enough novelty, make it worth risking indigestion. I took the sandwich. Remains from her waved her toward the front ruin, went to knock on the door of the dining room inside. Wolfe was at his usual post, a napkin tucked under his chin. Like a battle flag, the remains of Troutelaman sat at 12 o'clock. A glass of beer was at 6, and the look he gave me said, I'd better have walked in with a dying head of state, or the reincarnation of Julius Caesar apologize for the intrusion. I said sweetly, but there's a woman in the front room who says someone tried to murder her with a sandwich. He glared. Then she should consult a physician, or perhaps a dramatist. She brought evidence, I said, holding up the greasy paper. There was a note, a real one, slipped into her lunch, like the olive in a martini, and it says someone wants her very quiet very soon. Wolfe sighed, deep lithe, kind of sigh that made the curtains flutter. Archie, you are aware of my sentiments on hysteria. I am, but I'm also aware of your curiosity, which happens to be as sensitive as your palate. He considered it, scowled deeper, and waved a hand show her in, if only to prevent you from concocting more similes. Leia entered, cautious but composed. Wolfe barely glanced at her as he gestured to the red chair across from his. State your business concisely, he said, and omitters, they contribute nothing. She nodded, lips tight. My name is Leah McKinnon. I manage PR for a chain JV bakery is called Sweet Sector this morning. I stopped into Lucci's Deli on West 47th to pick up my usual order. He took it back to my office and unwrapped it and found that note inside Wolfe's eyes flicked toward the paper. I'd handed him. What were you investigating? That required silencing. She hesitated. I've been doing some background work on an acquisition deal for my company. A merger my boss asked me to dig into a small competitor, Pascal's, a boutique bakery that's suddenly gotten very popular very fast. Something felt off. Wolfe tapped the edge of his beer glass, and your inquiries provoked this, I think, so I spoke to a former employee of Pascal. She quit suddenly. Said something strange was going on with their suppliers. Shouldn't say more. That was 2 days ago this morning. I get that. Have you told the police? No, she said quickly. My boss said not to. He thinks it's just intimidation, but I don't think he realizes how serious it could be. Wolfe grunted. A note in a sandwich, tasteless in every sense. She came here instead of the police. I said that should earn her a few points for discernment. He stared at the sandwich remains like they were an affront. All things culinary. Fritz, he called. Dispose of that atrocity. Then back to Leia. I do not like being drawn into trivialities, however, if there is merit to your suspicion. And I say, if you have me attention temporarily. Leia gave a small breath of relief. Thank you. Mr. Wolfe, though. Not thank me, not yet. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Archie ascertained whether this Pascal's establishment deals in more than bio and branding. I want names, employees, to departures, financial patterns. I gave a little salute on it. Leia stood. Should I stay or no? Wolfe said, return to your life, but do nothing provocative and do not eat any food you did not personally prepare. Shebling, that's serious. I do not do hyperbole. Wolfe said flatly. If someone is issuing warnings via sandwich, they are capable of more. After she left, Wolfe finally leaned back and exhaled. Confounded nonsense, he muttered, still intriguing. You'll take I asked. He closed his eyes. I already have. I grinned. And here, I thought you didn't believe in lunch prizes. I had barely gotten my coat on and shut the front door behind me when I realized this wasn't going to be a routine jaunt through Midtown when a client walks in claiming someone used a hottie as a death threat. Your average gumshoe might chalk it up to a gag or ashity constitution. But when Wolfe agrees to look into it and does so during lunch, you take it seriously. I started with the obvious. Lucci's Deli, West 47th, a familiar sandwich shop that's been parked in the same spot since Eisenhower. The L on the door gave a sad little ring when I stepped in, greeted by the smell of garlic oil and cold cuts so fresh they practically mooted it. Was lunch hour, and the place was humming, though not packed. Behind the counter, a lean guy with sharp elbows and sharper eyes was slicing mortadella with fecund of care usually reserved for surgery. A name tag said Tommy, but the face said, don't waste my time, afternoon. I said, you the one who served a woman named Leia McKinnon this morning? Heppaust gave me a once over and said, depends. She a cop? Not even close. I'm Private Goodwin. Archie, she said. She picked up a sandwich here that came with a side of intimidation. It got me full stop. Tommy leaned in slightly, eyes narrowed. She tell you what kind? Oh, sandwich. Yeah, turkey provolone, no tomato oil and vinegar. Toasted, had a note inside. He made a face. A note, I nodded, wrapped inside the lettuce like a fortune. Cookie, except not lucky. That's nuts. He said, I made that sandwich myself. I'd remember. I was been coming in for months. Always gets the same thing, same time. She's polite. Tips. Well, I wouldn't. With her order, you the only one on the line this morning. He hesitated. Me and Sal, my cousin, but he was in back stocking. You let anyone else behind the counter today? Hell no, he said. That's our turf. Look, we're not running the CIA here, but nobody slips behind the counter unless they work here. And even then, not without washing their hands. Mind if you take a look at your trash? I asked. His eyebrows lifted. You serious? I gave him a patented boyish grin. Deadly. A few minutes later, I was in the back alley rooting through a dumpster with all the enthusiasm of a man who once turned down a date with a rocket to clean out a koi pond. Nothing jumped. Out no crumpled notes, no second threats, not even a discarded piece of lettuce. With telltale fingerprints, I came up empty smelly, but empty still. Wolfe had taught me to sniff patterns, not just evidence, and this one stunk of a setup from Lucci's eye. Headed uptown to Sweet Sector's headquarters, a sleek cube of glass and steel near. Bryant Park with a lobby that screamed boutique luxury, and a receptionist who looked like she could model handbags. When she wasn't directing phone calceria McKinnon, I told her she's in a meeting, the receptionist said. Do ya have an appointment? Tell her it's about her sandwich, you know. 2 minutes later, Leia emerged from a glass conference room. Looking slightly rattled and more than a little tired, she ushered into her office, closed the door behind us, and perched on the edge of her desk. Did you find anything? Not much, admitted the guy at the deli, swears up and down he made the sandwich himself. No funny business, says nobody else got behind the counter. Leia frowned. Then how did the note get in there? That's the million-dollar question, unless you're carrying around Rama with threatening messages. Somebody went out of their way to plant it, which raises the stakes. You sure you haven't been poking into anything really sensitive? She chewed her lip. Pascal's. That's Theon I told you about. Their numbers don't make. Since they opened a year ago, Onoloation in Soho, and within 6 months, they were being courted by investor-stack darlings, even food bloggers, who normally wouldn't touch a bakery unless it was run by a vegan influencer their CFO used to work in pharmaceuticals. Not typical for a croissant business. Anyone from Pascal's ever contact you direct? Lino, but someone sent an anonymous tip to my work email last week. It said to look into their supplier contracts, and the name Davenport Milling, that was the first name. That made a muscle twitch in the back of my brain. Wolfe had mentioned them once years ago in a discussion about flour tampering in a union dispute. You still have the email? She nodded, turned to her laptop, and pulled it up. I read it over twice short. Cryptic and signed. The oven knows. Either they're poetic, I said, or they've watched too many noir movies. I don't know what to do. She admitted my boss wants to move forward with the acquisition. He thinks this is all smoke, and if it's not, then someone's hiding something inside the baguettes. And I don't mean herbs. I left her with a warning to stay quiet and keep her head down. Wolfe was going to want to chew on this before we made a move back at the brownstone. I walked into the office to find Wolfe, with his eyes closed and his lips moving. It looked like meditation, but it was just digestion. I waited until his hand twitched. Our silence signaled that the stomach had settled and the brain had resumed its rightful seat. I handed him the print out of the email, gave him the details on Pascal's and Davenport Milling, and outlined what Leia had said. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then her said, the provenance of that sandwich is immaterial. Glad. I rifled through trash for nothing I did not say. Your efforts were volaces. The message architect is the fulcrum, the intrusion, and the decision to deliver it in so absurd a vessel suggests either arrogance or intimacy. You think someone close to her did it, perhaps, or someone close to Pascal's. But if this Pascal's has risen with such speed, and if its resource traced to Davenport, then the motive may lie not in culinary competition, but in concealment. I said, you think they are using the bakery as a front? I think Wolfe said that if someone from the pharmaceutical world is now needing dough and courting investors, they are either bored or hiding something far less palatable. He stood a rare event and walked to the globe in the corner of the room. He spun it slowly, not looking at Metamoro. Morning, you will visit Pascal's, observe, inquire, and do not eat anything. She grinned. No sandwiches. Got it. I want names of all employees. I want to know what's being baked, when, and for whom. And I want to know why a bakery needs investors more suited to Silicon Valley. You think it's a cover? I think, Wolfe said, turning to me with narrowed eyes. We have been invited into someone's kitchen, and they are trying very hard to keep the recipe secret, which coming from him was about the same as DEFCON 2. And I had a sudden craving for something safer than a sandwich like a gunfight next morning. Pascal's no apron required. Just nerves, charm, and an appetite. Farnsworth's the next morning broke clear and cold. The kind of crisp New York day that makes. You second-guess your decision to wear thin socks. I left the brownstone after a quick breakfast that Fritz insisted I not skip eggs. Florentine with a side of indignation over the current state of spinach, and made my way downtown to Soho for Pascal's. Was nestled in a slick, pretentious corner of Prince Street. From the outside, it didn't look like a bakery. It looked like Simeone had told an architect to build a spa, and then decided to toss in a few croissants. Sleek glass-fronted minimalist signage. Pascal's in brushed silver, and inside the kind of lighting that made everyone look. Instagram-ready, the pastries behind the glass weren't so much baked as curated, and the espresso machine looked like it could. Pilot at Jetty walked in slow, pretending to be the kind of customer who gets anxious about gluten, but brave enough to ignore it. Forehanded a young woman in a black apron approached, smiling like she'd just invented hospitality. "Good morning. Have you been here before?" "Not yet," I said, "but I've heard. Your Queen Yaman might change my life." She laughed. "They do that. We get people from all over the city. Just for those, I wandered to the counter, studying the case. Everything had names, longer than a Broadway cast list, and prices to match. Busy morning. We get most of our rush early," she said. "A lot of tech and finance people on their way to work, and lunch gets hectic too." I nodded, pointing toward the back, that the kitchen shrouded all open concept. "Our chef likes transparency, so did Wolfe, though I doubted he'd appreciate it." If Fritz made Sewell in a fishbowl, a tall man emerged from the kitchen. Just then, white coat, close-cropped beard, and a face that had clearly done some time on the cover of food magazines. He checked something on a clipboard, muttered to a line cook, and turned toward the front, spotting me just as I was still pretending to decide between a rhubarb tart and a plum financier's first time. He asked, stepping forward, and nodded. "Is it that obvious?" He smiled, hand extended. "I'm Julian Pascal. We like Tommy new customers." I shook. "Archie Goodwin." His eyebrows twitched at the name, like it had tickled something, then smoothed out. "Welcome, thanks. You've built quite the place here. Heard a rumor you're re-expanding." He tilted his head slightly. "Word travels fast. I work with some folks in the PR world. Heard sweet sectors." Sniffing around, Julian smiled. "Gothiner, there have been talks. That's all. Anyone would be interested. This setup looks expensive." He nodded slowly. "We've had backing from day one. Some silent partners who believe in the concept bakery as lifestyle brand." "Exactly." I turned toward the pastry case again, then gestured vaguely. "You mind if I ask a question off the record?" Julian's eyes narrowed. "Just a shade. Depends on the question. I heard about someone who got a sandwich yesterday from another deli, and it had a note in it threatening she'd been asking questions about Pascal's." He didn't flinch, but his gazellist, its friendliness. "That's absurd." "Sure it is, but absurd things happen, and when they do, sometimes they point to something deeper, Mr. Goodwin. I don't know what you're implying, but this business is legitimate. We source our ingredients carefully. Our investors are vetted. We're in a clean operation line. If I speak to some of your staff..." He folded his arms. "If you're here as a journalist or an investigator, I'll have to ask you to leave. We're not interested in gossip." "I'm not a journalist, but I am interested in why someone might be afraid of you." Head turned on his heel. "Have a nice day." So that was the tone I left, with a complimentary almond tart and a gnawing sense of déjà vu. Wolfe had said something about arrogance or intimacy. Pascal's had both. The whole place was too Polishedchu rehearsed, and Julian's reaction had been just a little too clean. Back on the sidewalk, I gave Saul Panzer a call if there was anything to find on Pascal or his mystery investors. Saul could dig it up from a payphone in a blizzard. "I need you to run a thread on Pascal's bakery." I told him, "Focus on finances, partnerships, and any connections to a company called Davenport Milling. Also see if you can find any ex-employees. Disgruntled is fine. Desperate is better." "I'll get on it," he said, and clicked off back at the brownstone Wolfe was in the plant rooms with. Theodore Horseman, deep in conversation about the stubbornness of a particular dendrobium hybrid. He emerged an hour later fragrant with moss and irritation, and waved mine to the office. I laid out what I'd seen, the bakery, the setup, the staff Julian Pascal. Too refined, I said, like someone buffed it clean and evasive, as Athricard Monte dealer on a lunch break. Wolfe took his seat and laced his fingers over his belly. Did you note the layout open? Kitchen clean lines, no back rooms, of course, there are. Back rooms, he saith, are simply not visible concealment by emission sols working on the financials. Wolfe grunted, which was as close to approval as I was getting. He reached for the note, the original sandwich slip, still sealed in a plastic sheath. Fritz had prepared with the summer reverence he gave duck confit. It is not merely the message. Wolfe said, turning it over. It is its method of delivery, the kitchenette. Lucci is not accessible to casual intruders, nor would a sandwich worker risk such a bizarre maneuver. Therefore, someone had to intercept or replace the sandwich after it was made. But before Leia received it, a courier, I asked, or someone within Suite Sector. Itself, perhaps, even Leia's own office, if Roundu thinks someone there wanted to spook her. It would explain much of false flag, designed to deflect a suspicion away from those truly responsible. I sat back. So now, we're not just looking at. Pascal's were looking at Suite Sector 2 Wolfe. Gave a heavy nod indeed, Mr. Goodwin. You will revisit Miss McKinnon. Ask her who has access to her lunch deliveries, her schedule, her inboxing. Want to know if this threat originated from within. As I stood to leave, Fritz appeared at the door, holding a folded note with a gloved hand. This arrived by courier, he said. No return address to Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe took it, unfolded it, with the kind of care usually reserved for ancient scrolls, and read it silently. Then he handed it to me. It said only, stop digging or she won't just get lettuce next time. I looked up, so they know we're involved. Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, then he opened them sharp and cold. Excellent, he said. We are no longer reacting, we are engaged. And just like that, things had turned. The game was no longer about pastry and PR, it was about power, and Wolfe had just been invited to play. If Wolfe had any lingering doubts about the seriousness of the case, the anonymous threat did the job of boiling them off like brandy in a pan. He didn't say much after reading it, just leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded, like he was pondering the metaphysical consequences of mustard on pastrami, but the set of his jaw said otherwise. When someone trespasses on Wolfe's sanctum, with threats veiled or not, they might as well announce they've lit a match in a room full of gas. The next step was mine. I was to go back to Suite Sector and dig into Leia's world, and this time not just as a friendly visitor. Wolfe wanted a list of access points, routines, people, anyone who could have tampered with her lunch or known about the email she received. Wolfe's working theory. The warning didn't come from the outside. It came from someone close, an insider, playing a double game. I arrived at Suite Sector around 10:30. Leia looked surprised to see me, but not displeased. Another sandwich scare. She skipped, half a smile on her face, but her eyes scanning me with something between worry and hope. Not yet, I said. But, we've got a follow-up question or 5. She led me to a smaller conference room, fewer glass walls, more discretion, and I explained the theory that the note and maybe even the email might have been planted not by Pascal's but by some trying to steer her or us off course. Her reaction wasn't outrage, it was weariness that told me more than she realized. Who has access to your lunch deliveries? I asked. Mostly me, she said. Sometimes Tanya, she's our office coordinator, she'll pick it up if I'm tied up, but usually I just grab it from reception. Is there a place it sits before you get to it? She thought. Sometimes Tanya leaves it on my desk or outside my door, unlocked. She blinked. Yes, and your email, who has access? No one, she said, then hesitated. Well, our IT department probably could, if they needed to, but I doubt they'd care about anything except spam filters and crash drives. I made a note. How big is the team working on the Pascals? Deal 6 of us, me, my boss Derek Paxton, and 4 others, mostly legal and operations people. Handle the public narrative and media engagement. Any of them opposed to the deal? She gave a tight smile. You don't have to be opposed to want it delayed. There's a lot of competition for Derek's attention. If the Pascals merger goes through, I move. Up so does he that makes some folks uneasy. I raised an eyebrow. So you're not exactly flavor of the month. I didn't say that, she said quickly, but in corporate politics ambition is like cologne. The more you wear it, the stronger the reactions that gave. Wolf something to work with, a little motive with your mail. I asked for names. She gave them Derek Paxton. Her boss, sharp, strategic, the kind of man who treat hamburgers like chess matches. Polished and unreadable, Tanya. Weathers, the officer coordinator. Friendly, efficient, unobtrusive, possibly underestimately. Drake, legal, young, intense, known for covering his bases and raising flags. Nobody asked for Mona Kressler, operations practical, rumored to have been passed over for Leia's current role 6 months ago. Dash caper, logistics and procurement numbers guide, quiet, reliable, keeps his head down, I thanked. Leia Ann made a slow exit, pausing to plant a few smiles and mild hellos at the reception desk. And through the open office maze, if you want to learn something in an office, you don't go through the executives. You go through the vents, and the vents talk on the way out. I saw Tanya, the coordinator, stacking coffee pods near the kitchen. I veered casually. Tanya. I said, easy tone, Leia says. You've helped her with lunch pickups. She looked up, startled. Oh yeah, sometimes only when she's really slammed you ever jet it from anywhere besides. Lucci's nope. She's religious about that turkey sandwich. Anyone else ever ask you to grab it for her? No, I mean maybe once Derek mentioned she'd forgotten, but hadn't asked me. Directly, just kind of pointed it out. I filed that you ever notice anything weird about the deliveries. Like if the bag was opened or it looked tampered with. She frowned. No, but now that you mention it, last week, I found it sitting on her desk when I came in. I assumed someone else had picked it up. Which day? Thursday. I think I remember Bess. She had a big call that morning I came in, and it was already there. Interesting. Thursday was the day before. Note, you don't know who dropped it. She shook her head. Sorry. I gave her a thank you grin and left back at the brownstone. Wolfe listened without commencing beer and tapping his fingertips together like he was conducting a symphony only he could hear. When I finished, he opened his eyes. The position is clear, he said. Miss McKinnon's threat was fabricated like Lido discredit her or delay her progress on the acquisition. The planted sandwich of 2 purposes: instill fear and create an illusion of external menace, which conveniently remove scrutiny from inside. Precisely the question now is how benefits most from derailing the merger timeline. I said Mona Kressler got passed over for Leia's role. Drake's illegal. Watchdog Paxton's the boss. Tanya's got casual access, and DHS, well, he's got a name in this story, but hasn't done much. It Wolfe turned to the globe. We must establish whose hand delivered the notusso. I handed over the latest. Saul had called earlier with an update. Pascal's investors have ties to a dormant shell corporation. That shell was connected to, wait for it, Davenport Milling. They supply industrial baking ingredients and pharmaceuticals. They've been investigated before. Twice Wolfe's nostrils flared. The bakery is a laundering front. Pascal is a figurehead in Leia's. Snooping got too close, or someone feared she might get close, Wolfe said. Hence the stage threat. The pieces were starting to fit. Someone inside Sweet Sector wanted the deal delayed, either to protect Pascal's, to protect themselves, or to shift power inside. The company. Wolfe was narrowing the field and needed confirmation. Archie, he said, you will invite Miss McKinnon here tomorrow at 11 o'clock. We shall take a deeper cut into the loaf. Any particular bait? She will bring the sandwich bag and a name I didn't ask how he'd get it. Wolfe had a way of making people talk sometimes by simply sitting there, glaring at the world until it confessed. I had a feeling your circle of suspects was about to shrink, because the problem with a fake threat is this one's you. No, its fakeite becomes real, and whoever cooked up this scheme was about to find out Wolfe wasn't on their lunch menu. He was the main course at precisely 11 the next morning. Fritz escorted Leah McKinnon into the office with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for foreign diplomats, and Sulitz Wolfe was already seated in his scare lips, set in a straight line that meant business, not philosophy. He gave her a glance not welcoming, not dismissive, and flicked 2 fingers toward the red chair. Opposite his she sat with a visible effort to hold her posture steady. The paper bag she brought was clutched tightly in her lap like a fragile relic. Wolfe didn't speak right away, which, if you ask me, is part of the trap. He lets excellence grow roots until people feel compelled to fill it with something: nervous words, confessions, slip-ups. She held out longer than most. Wolfe finally inclined his head. Miss McKinnon, thank you for coming. I will not prolong this meeting. You have been used either as a pawn or a wedge in a corporate dispute. That much is now obvious. My task is to determine whose hand moved you into place. She nodded. I understand you brought the bag. Shepherded it to me. I laid it gently on Wolfe's desk, and he inspected it through. Narrowed eyes, then motioned for me to set it aside. I assume it is the same brand and size used in the sandwich incident. It's from the same batch. I asked Tanya to keep one for me from that week. Good, that may become relevant. Hellest his fingers. Together now, to be clear. Miss McKinnon, you are not the target of this game. You are the instrument someone wanted to delay or derail the Pascal's deal by casting doubt on the bakery's legitimacy, creating fear, and perhaps even provoking public exposure. Such maneuvers suggest both urgency and proximity. She swallowed but nodded. So you think it's someone at Sweet Sector? I do. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with a sharp gleam. Tell me more about Derek Paxton, his temperament, his ambitions. He's focused, she said, and ambitious. He's seen as the rising star of the executive board. The Pascal's deal would put him on the map. Would he sabotage his own dealingly if he thought it was compromised? But I don't see why he would. Then we dismiss him for now. What about Elliot Drake? He's by the book, always covering legal angles, but he's not subtle. If he thought something was wrong, he'd send a memo, not a threat. Wolfe grunted. True, Miss Kressler. Leah hesitated. She's smart, capable, but I know she wasn't happy about being passed over. We've had a few tense meetings. Still, she's professional. Tanya Weathers, she's friendly, quiet. She doesn't have a dog in the fight that I know of. And Desh Kapoor. Leah frowned slightly. He's reliable, methodical, but he keeps to himself. Handles logistics and supply chain. I don't interact with him much. That hung in the air for a beat. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Miss McKinnon, who manages vendor due diligence at your company. She blinked at split legal. Does contract separations, does site visits, procurement flags anomalies, which falls under DH. I caught it then, just the flicker of recognition in her eyes, the way her head tilted slightly. As something began to click. Wolfe, of course, had seen it 3 seconds earlier. Miss McKinnon, he said, has Desh Kapoor ever voiced concern about Pascal's supply chain? She shook her head slowly. Not directly, but he once flagged a late delivery and said the source mill was unfamiliar. He told me offhand that it looked like a temporary vendor being used to inflate value on paper, when maybe 3 weeks ago. I didn't think much of it. Wolfe's fingers tapped once on the armrest. Mr. Goodwin? I nodded. I'll find him. 10 minutes later, I was at the Sweet Sector offices, again getting to. Kapoor went difficult. A couple of pleasantries, a forged air of casual curiosity, and a little help from a distracted receptionist got me to his glass-walled cubicle. He was just where you'd expect a logistics man to be seated, efficient, surrounded by neat columns of spreadsheets and vendor summaries. I leaned on the glass and gave him my best. You know Mesmo Dish Caper? He looked up, startled. Yes, Archie Goodwin. I'm working with Nero Wolfe on an inquiry related to your company's potential merger with Pascal's. He stiffened. I wasn't told about any inquiry. That's the charm of private work. No memos. He adjusted his glasses. What do you want your opinion on Pascal's supply Chain, you flagged inanimally. His eyes flickered. That's internal. Sure, but internal things have a way of leaking out when someone sends a threat note wrapped in a sandwich. He went pale, you think? I did. I say that it just said things leak like the name. Davenport Milling, that got him his hands clenched on the armrests. Where did you hear that name? It came up. I said you flagged that supplier, and you told Miss McKinnon, then shortly after she gets a threat designed to keep her from asking questions. Convenient, he stood abruptly. I didn't threaten her. Did you try to warn her? He looked torn. Then his voice dropped. Yes. I tried to be discreet. If I made noise, Pascal's would have shut the door. I've seen this before. Shell Vonderspry's stacking sometimes. Worse, did you send a sandwich? He shook his head fiercely. No, I swear. I wouldn't scare her then. Who would? He hesitated, then said someone who didn't want her sniffing around Davenport. Maybe someone who's already compromised inside Pascal's, maybe. Inside here, that Wasano, for now back at the brownstone. Wolfe listened carefully. He didn't interrupt, but his hands tensed once when I mentioned DH's warning being ignored. When I finished, he sat still for a moment, eyes closed, then rang for Fritz. Have Saul prepare for a deeper dive into Sweet Sector. He said focus on internal communications around vendor management or nearly there. I leaned forward. You think Caber's in the clear. He is not, though Thor fear Mr. Goodwin. He is its witness. And the sender we must confirm, Wolfe said, but I have formed a hypothesis. One final test will confirm it. He opened his eyes and smiled thinly. We will set the table and invite the guests. That means only one thing in Wolfe's world, the office gathering. And when Wolfe summons the players, it means the game is about to end. By mid-afternoon, the brownstone was a hive of quiet coordination. Fritz polished the glasses without being asked. Sol called in with confirmations. I was tasked with tracking down and inviting 5 specific people, each of whom had areas and to want the Pascal's acquisition. Delayed or derailed, Wolfe didn't say how he would do it. He never did, but he made it very clear this was the final act before Theckertain came down. I started with Derek Paxton, the boss, the type who worry ambition the way some men wear cologne thick and expensive. I reached him on Hissel. I'd like to invite you to a private consultation with Nero Wolfe. I said we were concluding our inquiry into the Pascals. Matter is this about Leia. His voice didn't change tone, but I heard a new tension under the polished edge. It's about the truth. Bring your team one buy-in. I extended the same invitation, Mona. Kressler tried to decline until I said Wolfe would take her. Absence as a statement of guilt. Elliot Drake was curt but agreed. Kapoor didn't hesitate, though he sounded like a man preparing to walk into a storm. And Tanya Weathers was oddly calm, just said, all right, and hung up. At 6:30, Wolfe was seated at his desk in his canary yellow dressing gown. Theathus was staged like a courtroom chairs, arrayed in a semicircle. The air subtly warmed by Fritz's heating system, and thick with orchids that seemed to loom. Like silent witnesses, the doorbell rang. I brought them in together, 5 faces. 5 masks, some curious, some weary, some already calculating. Leia was there too. My Wolfe's request seated slightly off to the side, neither part of the accused nor wholly removed. A complication, yes, but a necessary one. Wolfe didn't stand, he never did. But the atmosphere changed the moment. He opened his mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice low and even. I am not a detective in the popular sense. I do not chase villains down alleyways or eavesdrop behind potted plants. My method is intellectuality, is also infallible. No one spoke. You are here because a crime has been committed, not of violence, but of deception. A message was placed inside a sandwich, intended to frighten Miss McKinnon and sabotage her professional duties. We now know it was not an act of random mischief, but a calculated effort. Elliot shifted. In his seat, Mona crossed her arms. Paxton sat back, poker-faced. Wolfe continued, we have determined that the bakery known as Pascal's is not what it seems. It is a front partially financed through Davenport Milling, a company with a history of laundering. Revenue through shell vendors. This connection was flagged internally, quietly by Mr. Kapordenish, gave the faintest nod, but his warning went unheeded. Wolfe said because Picasso ensured that attention would be diverted by planting a threat where it would do the most damage. He turned his gaze slowly across the group. Who benefits if Laya McKinnon is forced to withdraw from the deal? Who ensures her credibility is undermined? Her progress delayed, her suspicions redirect. The room was still until Mona broke it. Terry, you accusing one of us? She asked, her voice taut. I accuse no one. Wolfe said, I state facts, for instance, that the sandwich bag used in the threat wasn't from Lucci's deli, but from Sweet Sector's internal catering supply, easily accessible to any employee that got him. Drake looked sideways. Tanya blinked. Wolfe nodded to me. I produced the original sandwich note, still sealed in the protective sleeve, and laid it gently on the desk. I've also confirmed. Wolfe said that the note was typed on a device belonging to Sweet Sector, not a personal typewriter, but one of two older portable models used for training exercises in your branding department, Miss Weathersmage's. The supplies and schedule for that room. Tanya stiffened, but said nothing. But the clearest evidence, Wolfe went on, came from a detail M.R. Caper gave us yesterday. He mentioned an anomalous voice, one that led him to investigate the shell vendor connected to Pascal's. That invoice was later removed from the internal tracking logs. Only one person besides Mr. Caper has back-end access to vendor documentation. He paused, then turned his gaze. Miss Crestlamona's face went blank. Wolfe leaned back slightly. You removed the invoice, Miss Clare, then you constructed a narrative around external threat. One net Waldra direct suspicion, slow the acquisition, and discredit your colleague. The sandwich was a performance, but the note-tething note was desperation. Mona opened her mouth, closed it again, then said, too quietly, you have no proof. You provided it. Wolfe said yesterday when Miss McKinnon recalled a sandwich arriving mysteriously early. You planted it before most staff had arrived. You knew her routine. You had opportunity and motive. Why? Laya's voice cut across the room. Mona finally turned to face her. Because I earned that promotion. I built that supply network. I was there before you. But Derek owes you. Paxton blinked, but said nothing. Mona's voice dropped. Then you started digging, and you were getting too close. I didn't know the Pascal's deal was that dirty. Not at first. I just wanted you rattled. I didn't mean for it to escalate. It always escalates. Wolfe said coldly. Falsehood, Ison, unstable compound. No one argued. Not now. The air had gone out of the room, replaced by the inevitability of consequences called Inspector Kramer after. The rest had filed out, each one silent in their own way. He was sending a couple men to pick up. Mona. Wolfe, of course, didn't care about the legal outcome. He'd already issued the verdict that mattered. Fritz brought in dinner quail stuffed with wild rice, and the brownstone finally resumed its natural silence. I was halfway through my second helping when Wolfe spoke again. She was foolish. He said she thought a lie, if wrapped carefully, could survive in few world of reason. Some lies addressed better than the truth. I said. Wolfe grunted. Yes, but the truth. Mr. Goodwin has the advantage of appetite. It enters even in a sandwich. I gave him a look. You're not going to eat anything with deli meat for a week. Are you Fritz? Wolfe called, ignoring me. No pastrami until further notice. So ended the case of the sandwich. That screamed, and for once nobody asked for seconds. By the next morning the storm had passed, but the air was still thick with its scent. The brownstone was unnaturally quiet, even for a place where silence was part of decor. Wolfe hadn't emerged from the plant room since breakfast. Fritz, respecting the ritual of recovery after a case, kept his movements deliberate and unintrusive. And me, I was at my desk sipping coffee and replaying the events of the night before in my head, like a detective with no crime left to solve. Mona Krustler had confessed, at least in spirit, if not in a form admissible in court. She'd made the kind of calculated misstep that Wolfe specialized in catching, not just deceit, but bad deceit motivated by pride, ego, and the knowing hunger that comes from seeing someone else wear the success you believe you tailored. But that didn't mean the cafe was closed, not entirely, because Wolfe hadn't said it was, and that for Emmanuel rarely left loose ends. Hanging meant there was something still swinging at 11. Wolfe rang for me. I found him in the office, seated with his usual deliberate testless eyes on the morning's mail arrayed. Across the blotter, like suspects in a lineup. Sit. He said, not looking up. I did. He tapped one envelope with a blunt finger. This came an hour, Agahan delivered. No return. I picked it up, tore it open, and unfolded the sheet inside plain paper, typed no signature. The bakery deal goes through regardless. Wasn't about Leia, it was about time, and you're out of it. I read it twice, then looked up, so Mona wasn't the end of it. No. Wolfe closed his eyes. She was the diversion, the one they let take the fall. You think someone put her up to it? I think someone let her act knowing she would. I also think someone has continued playing even after her removal, which means the larger matter, the true motive, remains obscure. I stood. I'll call Saul. Already done. Wolfe said he's tracing the delivery route of that letter now. In the meantime, you will visit Derek Paxton. You think the boss was in on it. You think he is not stupid. Wolfe said, and no man of his temperament permits chaos among his ranks, unless he has a reason to benefit from it. Leia trusts him. Miss McKinnon. Wolfe said with the faintest scorn, trusts the rules of advancement, where Paxton adheres to the rules of leverage. It was Wolfe in a nutshell, respecting the machinery of ambition, not the idealism that powered it. So I went back to the suite. Sector offices where the tension had grown thicker in the wake of Mona's arrest. No one said anything outright, but you could feel the glances sharpen as I walked in. Guilt doesn't always speak, but it glares. Paxton was in his glass-walled corner office, hands folded on his desk like a man posing for a profile shot. He didn't tries when I entered, just gestured to the seat across from him. Mr. Goodwin. Hesed, is this an epilogue? That depends, I said. We got a letter this morning, no signature, implied that Mona was just the first course. He didn't link, and you think I'm the main dish. You're the only person still in position to benefit, if the deal slides forward while the company's distracted. Wolfe thinks you're playing chess. I am playing chess, he said flatly. Every executive is, but I didn't authorize a forged threat tomb of my team. Then maybe you turned your back while someone else did. Helen back. Mona was ambitious. She made a move and got burned. That's the game, but if someone else is using this as cover, you'd want to know. I said. He hesitated. Yes, I decided to push Davenport Milling. You knew about the connection that landed. His lips pressed together for just a second too long. Note at first, he said, but I got a hint last week. I didn't pursue it. The board wants acquisition. They don't care about the sausage-making, pastry-making. I corrected. He ignored it. If Wolfe has something concrete, I'll listen. But I wouldn't kill the deal on a theory back at the brownstone. Wolfe was waiting. I gave him the rundown Sperigno detail. He absorbed it without expression, then said, Saul located the courier Midtown errand service paid. In cash, no pickup signature, but the description. He held up a card, tall, mid-40s. Thinning blonde hair, red scarf, gray wool coat. I frowned. Julian. Pascal. Wolfe gave a slight nod. Indeed, the face of the bakery. The man we've treated as a figurehead, but the figure has taken a step. He's worried. No, Wolfe said. He's asserting control. This was a message that he'll proceeds, or interference will be punished. He no longer fears exposure, and Leia's still in the crosshairs. Precisely. He was quiet for a moment, then said, we will invite Mr. Pascal here this evening. Voluntarily he will come. Wolfe said, Yah will make it compelling. That's how I found myself at Pascal's sleek shop at 5:15, facing the man behind the curated pastries and polished facade. He was wrapping up a conversation with a supplier when I stepped in. Mr. Pascal, I said, smiling just enough. Nero Wolfe would like a word tonight. His eyes tightened. What's it about the note? The game, the mistake you just made? He stared for a moment, then said, fine, 8 o'clock. At the brownstone, we prepared therum again. Only one guest this time, Wolfe, at Fritz. Prepare a tray of petit fours more, as a silent insult and an offering. When Pascal arrived, he wore confidence like a well-cut coat, but I'd seen confidence crack. Before, Mr. Pascal Wolfe said, "You've come a long way in a short time from obscurity to centerpiece." Quite the leap I had helped Davenport. Milling Wolfe said, "A company with flexible ethics, you built Pascal's as a shell, a vessel, and you kept it clean until Leah McKinnon started looking. Pascal didn't flinch. She wasn't a threat, no." Wolfe agreed, "But you needed time, so Mona created a distraction, and you let her now. The deal moves forward with." Minimal scrutiny. Pascal raised an eyebrow. "Is this the part where you accuse me?" "No," Wolfe said, "I'm not the law, but I'm an obstacle, and you've miscalculated." Pascal smiled faintly. "What do you want?" Wolfe's voice was cool. "You will withdraw from the acquisition publicly. Blame instability or strategy. I do not care. You will remove your bakery from Sweet Sector's table. And if I don't..." Wolfe turned to me. I handed over the folder, Saul Panza's findings. I said, "Financial laundering, fraud, and a quiet agreement with a real estate holding company tied to a pharmaceutical." Recall. Pascal's face darkened. "I'll go to the board." I said, "Leah too. And the press history writes itself." Wolfe added, "You are a symptom, Mr. Pascal, and symptoms are treated." Pascal stood slowly. "You think you've won?" "No," Wolfe said, "I think you've lost the difference." Is procedural. Pascal left. We didn't see him again. 2 days later, Pascal's issued a statement withdrawing from all pending partnerships due to internal restructuring. The deal collapsed. Sweet Sector shifted course. Mona Kressler was charged with internal fraud, and Leah McKinnon promoted quietly. Wolfe, of course, said nothing more about it, not even when Fritz served Milanize the next night, and I made a crack about hiding message under breadcrumbs. But as I was leaving the room, he said without looking up, "There are many ways to poison ambition, Archie, but deception is the one with flavor." And I knew without asking that he was already moving on. The game was over. But Wolfe's appetite for truth, for balance, for the quiet triumph of the mind, was still very much alive 3 days after Pascal's public withdrawal. Wolfe Brownstone had settled into one of its usual periods of post-case tranquility. Wolfe was back to his full routine: orchids from 9 to 11 lunch, at 1 silence between meals unless absolutely necessary. Fritz reclaimed his kitchen like a monarch returning to the throne, and I found myself in the rare position of catching up on paperwork instead of dodging bullets or egos. But I wasn't quite ready to shove this one, yet something still itched. Wolfe hadn't mentioned the case again since Pascal's visit, which in his world meant it was over. Case resolved, equilibrium restored. But I'd been thinking not about the sandwich, though. It still ranked in the top 5 strangest delivery methods I'd seen, but about Leah, more precisely Abatho close she'd come to getting torpedoed by someone she worked beside every day, and how quiet she'd been since E10 that morning. I dialed her line. She picked up after 2 rings. "McKinnon, it's Archie. A pause. You calling to check if I've gone vegan? Tempting, but no. Wolfe may have closed the file, but I'm curious, how are things over there?" "You mean after my boss's pet bakery turned out to be Ashel game, and my coworker tried to sabotage me with a sandwich?" "Something like that." She gave a tired laugh. Thebord's still reeling. "Derek's in damage control mode. He hasn't said anything about Mona, except that it's unfortunate and..." Pascal vanished. Sweet Sector issued a vague "Thank you for your partnership's release," and scrubbed the calendar. "You think you'll show up again in Thefood World?" "Probably not, but the real estate behind Pascal's location is still valuable. He'll pivot." I still can't believe Mona would go that far. Shouldn't go far enough. I said that was her mistake. There was another pause. "I have to admit something," she said. "I haven't told Wolfe." They perked my ears. "Go ahead." "I get another message yesterday, email. This time same phrasing, you're out of time." My hand tensed around the receiver. "From where?" "Anonymous burner account, but it was sent from inside the company network. I'm coming over by the time." I got there with receptionist, who knocked to stop me. Leia met me in the hallway, tense and pale, and led me straight to her office. She pulled up the message on her screen. It was short, just one line. "You made the wrong move, this isn't over." I stared at it for a while, then turned to her. "Did you tell anyone else?" No good, because the game, it turned out, wasn't over after all. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened insolence as I relayed the update. He didn't blink, didn't grunt, didn't even reach for his beer. He waited until I was finished, and then spoke as if he'd known it would come. "Of course," he said. "Pascal was never the origin, he was the instrument." I frowned. "Then who was the composer?" Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "Not Mona, not Pascal, and not Paxton. The author fears someone else, entirely someone still inside. Sweet sector with access motive and a longer strategy. But what strategy? The deal's dead, Pascal Scone." "No, Wolfe," said, "the Pascal deal is dead. But the platform sweet sector is not. Someone wanted control of the decision-making process. And Miss McKinnon, by surviving disrupted, that y'all think this is about a power grab. I think this is about positioning. If Pascal waste bait, someone else was fishing for bigger prey." That was when Saul called. His voice, as usual, was as dry as a banker's cough. "I've got something internal." Chatter from Sweet Sector. A procurement officer, Caper, filed a report about a second vendor chain linked to Pascal. That report was closed and reassigned the same day. Reassigned Tossamian, named, wait for it, Elliot Drake. I looked at Wolfe. "He's legal." I said he was in that room, never said a word about the reassignment because he had no reason to. Wolfe replied he was never interested in stopping the acquisition. He was interested in controlling it. And when Miss McKinnon got too close to the real network, he used Mona as a smoky out screen. And now he's still playing cleanup. Wolfe nodded. "Yes, and we shall give him the opportunity to incriminate himself." We planned it that evening. Wolfe dictated a brief email to Leia, one that would appear to come from her to Elio Tenocuus, except for one planted phrase. "I've spoken to Archie. He knows about the fallback vendor you approved. I think we need to talk." Saul helped. Joss routed through her internal account. We sent it just after 8 at 9:07. Drake responded, "Who have you told we need to contain this? Call me." Now at 9:15, he left office at 9:28. Saul trailed him to a locked storage unit in Chelsea, one rented under the name of a shell company previously associated with Davenport Milling. Inside, boxes of falsified vendor accords, unused branding collateral, and correspondence that linked Drake to Thalarger operation behind Pascal's bakery stunt records he'd intended to destroy the next morning. I handed the evidence to the board's outside counsel by noon. Drake had resigned to pursue other opportunities. Wolfe didn't gloat, hadn't even react other than to nod when I confirmed the sequence. Then he returned to his book on the morale dilemmas of Zantine courtiers, as if contemporary deceit didn't merit his continued attention at dinner that evening. Fritz served chicken galantine with herb aspic and a subtle side off-restered piece. Wolfe ate with evident satisfaction, but no comment. I poured my beer and said, "So that's it. First Mona, then Pascal, and finally Drake." The whole erythrin layer peeled back. "No," Wolfe said calmly. "Not peeled back, discarded like a bot crust." I smirked. "You sure you're not going to miss sandwiches?" He glanced at me. "I did not abandon sandwiches. I abandoned compromise sandwiches. The distinction matters." I lifted my glass to untainted rye. He didn't toast back, but he did in a small bit. Unmistakable act of approval. Eat the entire portion without once setting down his fork, and with that the case of the sandwich that screamed, "Finally, finally." Went quiet the next day. I figured we'd earned a stretch of peace, maybe even enough to get caught up on the male pilly accumulating in the front hall like fallen leaves. But peace, as I've learned in Wolfe's orbit, is more of a theory town of practice at 9 sharp, just as Fritz was setting down Wolfe's morning coffee and the rest of us were still trying to remember what silence Sounded like the doorbell rang. Fritz, with his usual Camen's word at moments later, he stepped into the office with a card in hand. Camden Arnett. He said he insists the matter is urgent and personal. Wolfe barely looked up. You've read the card? Yes. Does it contain any reference to food, family, or favors? No, Sir. Wolfe sighed. Then Archie will vet him. I rose, curious despite myself. Arnett wasn't a name I recognized, but in this business, strangers at the door had a habit of becoming problems with stationery. The man waiting in the front room was tall, in his 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and an expression that told you right away he didn't believe in wasting time or pleasantries. He wore a suit that looked expensive without being new, and shoes polished to a dull military gleamer. Goodwin. I nodded. Camden Arnett. I run compliance for one of Suite Sectors Institutional Investors, Fairmore Holdings, big stake. I said your people pulled some strings to get that Pascal's deal on the agenda. He didn't smile, which is why I'm here. I need Wolfe's help quietly on what damage control, but not kind Paxton handles. There's something deeper, something we didn't catch until your investigation forced. Pascal's out. I studied him for a second. Wasn't sweating. He wasn't panicking, but he was leaning forward, just enough to suggest pressure applied recently. And hard. I motioned to the office door. You can tell Wolfe. He entered like a man walking into a courtroom. Wolfe didn't rise, of course. He rarely rose for heads off state, much less financial officers. But his eyes flicked open as Arnett Satmer. Arnett. Wolfe said, I presume you come bearing not flattery, but information. I do. Then stated briefly. Arnett took out a folder. After your investigation, we conducted an internal audit as a precaution. What we found was a side channel of funds, 7 figures, routed through shell companies related to Pascal's and 2 other failed food ventures, all tied to one origin. Wolfe laced his fingers, which is a man named Ross Capetti. He used to work for Davenport. Milling disappeared from their ledgers 3 years ago. Since then, he's been quietly embedding himself in boutique food startups. As a financial architect, a laundering engineer, Wolfe Sadie's, and the link we missed is Suite Sector itself. Capetti's been trying to infiltrate our board, not through Pascal's, but through votes, proxy maneuvering, shifting small stakes into sleeper hands, and using threats. I added to create chaos and hide the build-up. Arnett nodded grimly. You exposed Mona and Drake, but Capetti was letting them draw the attention. They were pawns. There are others we haven't identified. Yet Wolfe's eyes narrowed. And your request help us find the remaining proxies. We don't have the tools you do. Wolfe considered, then said, no. Arnett stiffened. Excuse me, I do not provide forensic accounting. Wolfe said, however, I do pursue the truth, especially when someone presumes to use violence or threat to obscure it. Arnett's jaw tightened. So you'll do it? I will take the case. Wolfe said, but I will not act as a boardroom janitor if this Capetti wishes to play her chitticked. I shall dismantle the blueprint. And just like that, we were back in the fire. I followed Arnett out and asked the necessary question. How do contact Capetti? You don't. He contacts you through intermediaries. The last one was a woman named Kyra Stillman. Owns a cafe in Tribeca, small, quiet, used once before he buy Pascal's for private meetings. I grinned. Sounds like a nice place for a chat that afternoon. I took a walk down to Kira's cafe. It was everything. Arnett said it would be quaint, tasteful, and practically soundproof. Kyra herself was behind the counter. Early 40s, effortlessly poised, and unsurprised when I mentioned Capetti's name. I don't know where he is, she said calmly. But I know he won't be happy you're poking around. He's already unhappy. We blew his bakery. She gave a tight smile. That was just to test Capetti's real move. Is the be-out attempt quiet, legal, and already half in place? Then I'll need to talk to him. She shook her head. He doesn't do talks. He does exits. Tell him Nero Wolfe is paying attention. Her smile faded back at the brownstone. I relayed the encounter. Wolfe remained unmoved. Huel surface. He said he cannot afford to let the proxies be traced and win. He does. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Then we shall give him an option I waited to expose himself. Wolfe said, or watch his A. Structure collapsed the next day. An envelope arrived hand-delivered again. No return address inside one-line name. Your terms, Wolfe, dictated a response. Come to the brownstone alone, or the board gets a list of shell subsidiaries and their true ownership. That night at 8:42, the bell rang. I opened the door. Ross Capetti was shorter than I expected, compact, well-groomed, and very, very alert. You're Wolfe's man? He asked. I'm the doorman. Come in. He entered the office with the practiced weariness of someone who'd made a habit of avoiding cameras laws. An honest man, Wolfe, didn't tries. Mr. Capetti, he said, let us not waste breath. You are exposed. Capetti said nothing. You have ceded the suite. Sector board with silent votes. You USA Dascals as a probe. You lost. Now you will dismantle your position publicly. Or it shall do it for you. Capetti studied him. You're bluffing, Wolfe. Gestured. I handed over the packet. Every shell company, every traceable ledger entry, every falsified vendor line. Saul had dug up. Catti's eyes narrowed. You hand this to the board, Wolfe said, and you lose everything. Walk away now, and I may persuade them to forget your name. Capetti hesitated, then nodded once sharp and quick, and left. We never saw him again. But Sweet Sector stock stabilized. The board quieted. Leia, newly promoted, sent Wolfe a note. He vanished, but his vote disappeared from the ledger 2 days later. You were right. Wolfe didn't reply. He merely returned to his chair, poured a second glass of beer, and said, Fritz, tomorrow we'll have ham on rye with mustard, nothing hidden. Balance arrested even in the sandwich world. Capetti's exit didn't make the papers. There were no subpoenas, no mug shots, no grand finale, just a silence that spread throughout the boardroom and trickled outward like ink and water. His votes vanished from the ledger. His shell companies folded quietly, and Sweet Sector minus. The parasites moved on with the grace of a cat, pretending it never fell off the counter in the first place. But in Wolfe's world, closure wasn't about spectacle. It was about restoration. Hadn't cared if Capetti was arrested or spirited off to some offshore financial ghost town. What mattered was that the structure was neutralized and the sanctity of order returned. It should have ended there, but it didn't. It was 3 days after Capetti's last appearance, early evening, when Fritz called me into the kitchen with an odd expression. That in itself was rare. Fritz didn't call me anywhere. If he wanted me, he let Wolfe do the yelling. There is a man at the back entrance. Fritz said he will not give his name. He asked for you, not Mr. Wolfe. Me. Yes, and he seems frightened. They got my full attention. I headed out the back hallway and opened the service door. The man standing there was young 20s maybe, with anxious energy of someone whose conscience had just outpaced his fear. He wore a courier's jacket, one of those branded private outfits that deliver legal files and high-end groceries. His eyes darted toward the street like he expected someone to yank him back into a van. You Archie Goodwin. That's what it says on my tax returns. I brought something. He pulled a thick mantling envelope from under his coat and passed it over. I wasn't supposed to come here. I'm not part of it. Part of what? But Hugh was already backing up. I just deliver things. This wasn't supposed to be dangerous, and before I could press him, he turned and vanished down the alley legs, pumping like a sprinter late to his own escape plan. I locked the door, turned to the office, and handed the envelope to Wolfe without a word. He opened it, removed the A contents, and laid them flat across his desk. Inside were 3 items: a flash drive, a typed letter, and a single page summary titled Subject Project Mallard Internal Overview. Redacted. Wolfe didn't speak. He read, then read again, then finally gestured for me to sit. I did, Mr. Goodwin, he said quietly. Our case was deeper than we knew. I didn't like the way he said if letter was anonymous, of course, but the content was specific. Someone somewhere inside the remains of the Capetti network had chosen to come clean. The letter laid out in careful but damning terms that Pascal's had only been one of several pilot ventures, that Capetti wasn't working alone. and that Project Mayard had been a code name and experimental investment pattern that tested markets not just for returns, but for behavioral response. They weren't just laundering. I said, scanning the summary, they were observing, yes. Wolfe's voice was flat. The bakery's sudden rise was manufactured, not just to test financial manipulation, but social manipulation. Influence emotional response to scarcity, prestige, artificial exclusivity, like a lab rat, but with buy-in. Miss McKinnon nearly compromised it, which is why they sent the sandwich. Wolfe nodded a warning. Yes, but also a test. Would she back down? Would she press forward? Would her company protect her or isolate her? I leaned forward. Capetta wasn't just stealing, he was mapping behavior, yes. And when exposed, retreated. About the network remains. I opened the flash drive on my own machine. It contained a spreadsheet encrypted, but crackable with a little help, and 2 audio files. One was a conversation. Eamon's voice, mid-40s, clipped and amused. We watch the wave. Then we ride it. If it folds, we pivot. If it builds, we scale. That's the pattern emotionally. Engineered markets. Pascal's was just an appetizer. I looked up. That's not Capetta. No. Wolfe said, and the envelope did not come from him. It came from someone close enough to know this voice, someone attempting to sever their teeth, perhaps, protect themselves. Then we're back in. We never left that night. Wolfe made one call, not to Arnett, not to the police, to Leah. She arrived just after 9, visibly tense. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does. But he gestured for her to sit, and I handed her a printed copy of the letter. She read it slowly once, then again. I knew something wasn't right, she said softly. I thought it was about the bakery, about the deal, but this, yes. Wolfe said it was about the system, about who could be moved. Capetta was testing more than food trends. Wolfe nodded. He was testing people, predictability, loyalty, and fear. She looked at him then. We have to expose it. Wolfe didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was level. No, not yet. This network remains active, fragmented. Yes, but intact. If we act too soon, we alert them. They vanish again. But then you will remain in place. Wolfe said, you will watch, and if they attempt to rebuild, we will be ready. She exhaled slowly. You're using me. No, Wolfe said. They used you. I intend to return the favor. After she left, Wolfe remained at his desk, eyes distant. He didn't speak for a long time. I waited, because I've learned that when Wolfe thinks in silence, he's often 2 steps ahead of reality. When he finally looked up, he said, this began with a sandwich, and it's ending with a movement. No, he said, it is not ending. It is maturing. These people are no longer content to steal. They wish to mold. I nodded then. What do we do? Wolfe stared at the window. We wait. We listen. And when they surface again, when they attempt another test, I shall be prepared. Until then, we hold our ground. Stood a rare gesture. I will not be moved. Archie let them try. And just like that, we weren't out of the woods. We were building a fire in the middle of it. It was nearly a week before anything else moved. Wolfe stayed in the brownstone the whole time, of course, but even I couldn't. Something had shifted in the air. He was still attending to his orchids, still eating like a monarch, and still spending his evenings with a book and a bottle of beer, but his silences stretched longer. His glances, when they landed on me, lingered just a touch too long. He was waiting, not brooding, calculating, and I knew better than to disturb a mind mid-construction. So when Saul finally called, 3 minutes on a Thursday, so quiet event, the radiator seemed to be holding its breath. I was already halfway to the phone. Got a bite. Saul said, not a big one, but enough. He laid it out clean. A new shell entity had just been registered through an obscure Nevada holding firm with ties to one of the previous Pascal proxies. The board had seen movement, just a fraction of a vote shifted through a side trust into a new block. Nothing dramatic, but strategic, meant to go unnoticed, meant to be patient. I hung up, turned, and saw Wolfe already watching me from the doorway of the office. Confirmed, I said. He nodded once slowly, then returned to his chair, settling into it like a general returned to command. he gestured toward the folder I dropped on the corner of his desk, opened it, and reviewed the summary. Without a word, when he finally looked up, his face was unreadable. "We have reached the root," he said. "It will flower again, but not here." Sweet Sector Clean Nero Wolfe said they were the proving ground, but this operation project, my artists, they so quaintly called it, is larger than one company. They were probing 4 patterns. Now they will relocate, rebrand, and resume elsewhere. We let them cannot defeat shadows by flailing at them. He said, but we can shape the light he waited. We will document what we have delivered to Arnett and his ilk with specific instructions. They will deny it publicly, of course, but privately they will. Adjust, they will vote differently, tighten the net. And if competitors visits, he won't, Wolfe said, but his successor will be ready. He poured himself a glass of beer and took a long sip before speaking again. "Mr. Goodwin, do you recall what I said when this began, that sandwiches are sacred?" He frowned. "I said that absurdities often avail for precision, that nonsense when engineered ceases to bend sense." He set the glass down. A sandwich carried a message. So did Thesilence after. So does this network. They communicate not in words, but in moves. It is a new dialect of deception. We must become fluent. I leaned back. That sounds like the start of a long war. No, he said simply, just another game. One we are well equipped to win. There was a knock on the door and Fritz appeared with the dinner menu. Wolfe gestured him in, then turned back to me as Fritz retreated to the kitchen. "You may inform Miss McKinnon she is no longer at risk, not because the danger is gone, but because she is now useful, and that, in their world, is the highest protection available." I nodded, and after that he closed his eyes, hands folding over his belly. "You will join me for dinner," he said. "Fritz is preparing braised duck with spiced orange glaze, and afterward I may consider resuming my correspondence with the Times about their abominable treatment of garlic. Sothit was that the threat hadn't ended with an arrest or a confession or a body hauled out in cuffs. It had ended with information documented, tracked, handed off to the people who needed it. Wolfe hadn't crushed the network. He had outlived it. Out hot, it let it show its face, just long enough to know its shape, and then turned the world around it, just enough to squeeze it out of relevance. And me, I updated. The files lit a cigarette on the stoop when the sky was turning violet over the skyline, and thought about sandwiches. Turns out Wolfe was right sometimes. The most dangerous thing on your plate isn't poison, it's purpose. And when someone's using your lunch to test your mind, that's when it's time to bring in Nero Wolfe. Because whether it's a bullet, a bluff, or a bio, if it threatens the balance of his world, will sit still, think carefully, and end it without leaving his chair.